The 4 levels of feedback is a useful way to widen our repertoire of feedback comments we can offer to students' work. I'd like to share with you 3 cautionary tales when it comes to understanding the 4 levels of feedback. Firstly, do we understand the 4 levels of feedback to be about student outcome or teacher's intent? Take a look at what the authors say. Here, the authors claim there are 4 major levels of feedback and that the level at which the feedback is directed influences its effectiveness. Now, could the authors have used a stronger word in place of the word influence? Could they have said to ensure, to guarantee, but they chose the word influence. So it brings to mind that they are making a strong claim, and the claim is about how the 4 levels of feedback is about teachers' intention rather than guaranteeing or ensuring particular student outcomes. In fact, Hattie and Timperley describe 6 variables that might influence the outcome of each level of feedback. Firstly, do students understand the feedback? Can they self-assess their own work? Are they willing to read, to use this information for improvement? Were they confident about their initial work? Can they understand how your feedback comments explains the gap in their understanding and the steps moving forward? And finally, are they able to ask for help? So the misconception that we need to be cautious of is that some people think that feedback levels is about the quality assurance of feedback. It is in fact only about the teacher's intent to attain a level of outcome. The second cautionary tale I'd like to share is about this misconception that task level and process level feedback is good enough for the long-term learning of students. To help you understand why this is not the case, I'd like to begin by sharing Sadler's definition of learning. He proposed that learning can be said to have occurred when the students are able to do 3 things. They could do something they couldn't do before on demand, they could do it independently, and they can do it well. How many of you can ride a bicycle? So if you can ride a bicycle and I present a bicycle before you now, you are able to do it on demand. You won't say that you need to look at the time or the occasion. And would you need me to hold the back of the bicycle for you? Probably not. You're able to do it independently and you're able to do it well without crashing into pedestrians or shrubs along the way. If you agree with Sadler's definition of learning, what then should be your ambition level of feedback eventually? If you agree that learning must be good enough, then minimally a task level feedback will be required. Just giving feedback at the self level might not be able for students to know how well they have performed on a particular task. But if you expect learning to be done on demand, then would you agree that task level feedback might not be adequate? Students might need to have process level feedback to be able to interrogate the manner in which they approach a problem or understand a question. And finally, if we want students to be able to learn independently and perform particular processes and thinking on their own, what would be the minimum level of feedback that they will require? Would you then agree with me that self-regulation level feedback might be needed? So, the misconception about task level and process level feedback being good enough for the long term needs to be cautioned. Because if we only stop at task level and process level feedback, we might not know whether students have truly learned and whether they have the increased capacity to make use of opportunities to evaluate their learning and to develop their evaluative judgment of their work. So far, we have looked at two misconceptions with regard to understanding the levels of feedback and how it is important to remember that the feedback levels is about the teacher's intent to attain a level of outcome. It is not the quality assurance level of feedback. Secondly, it's also important to remember the role of self-regulation feedback for the purpose of developing students' learning for the long term. Some teachers might be discouraged that students, despite their best effort in giving them lots of feedback, don't seem to have learned and learned well. So one misconception that we want to caution teachers is the view that learning is about the immediacy of it, when in actual fact, it is about learning eventually. At this juncture, I invite you to have a go at crafting feedback at different levels. Begin by thinking of a context or topic in your subject discipline. Give an example of each level of feedback. For example, at the process level, try to make reference to a process you have taught your student. It can be a script or mnemonic, and use that to help them analyze root causes of their mistakes or issues. At the self-regulation level feedback, prompt students with the use of questions to generalize, hypothesize, and make critical judgment of their work on how to improve. So at the self-regulation level, consider it to be appropriate for students who have already mastered the task level demands, and you are helping them to think about the +1 to their learning. You can post your ideas on Padlet, and in the link you can also see exemplars as needed.